restoring Illinois to greatness. This is Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute and hosted by AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Ted Dabrowski, Vice President of Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute, illinoispolicy.org. And Ted, Governor Bruce Rauner this week, in responding to the outcry from social service providers and others waiting for checks from the state government, said, look, you can't help the most vulnerable if Illinois isn't competitive and if we can't pass a constitutionally mandated balanced budget. Social service providers understandably are concerned about their ability to continue to provide critical services that they're frankly better positioned to provide than government. And is more generally, do they have a point, or are they targeting the wrong individual or individuals when they offer their laments for non-payment?
Well, clearly, as you mentioned, they're suffering. They're trying to make ends meet with whatever their commitments are to people in need. But I think the longer story, or how they should be looking at it, is Rauner's trying to fix a problem that's been ongoing for more than 13 years. When you look at the previous administrations and what they've done, it's much more disastrous than where we are today. For example, I'll give you, in the last 13 years, we've doubled the number of people on food stamps from 1 million to 2 million people in Illinois. That's a disaster. And that should be a huge concern about how we were running things in the past. Same thing, 200,000 people still do not have jobs compared to the pre-recession period in Illinois. So those are huge problems, and people who are suffering and can't make ends meet. So Rauner's trying to fix the long-term problem. And that's the way to do that, is to get good economic growth.
Well, the structural problems, too, is also not to turn entitlement programs into ways to kind of curry favor with voters, to extend them to individuals and families that were never conceived to legally have access to them. Medicaid seems to be a perfect example of this, which I know is not a sexy program, but it turns out to be our largest single budget item. And what was done under previous governors is, well, let's continue to lower the threshold for Medicaid access. I mean, and by lowered, I mean higher and higher household incomes can access Medicaid, because we want to essentially buy people off with an entitlement where they can get free or reduced health care coverage. But it turns out we can't finance that. And so then the truly vulnerable people who the program was conceived to provide quality health care to, they see their access lessen because people stop taking Medicaid patients because the state doesn't pay its bills.
Yeah, you're right. With all the expansions in Medicaid, in a few years, a third of all Illinoisans will be on Medicaid. And Medicaid was supposed to be the safety net for the most vulnerable. And as you said, we've ballooned it so much now that we spend so much money that really we can't dedicate enough money to the poor and disadvantaged, because we're trying to take care of so many Illinoisans. So as long as we keep doing that, we're hurting the people that we really need to be helping.
And interestingly, too, because you have the politicians, again, in both parties, they run down to Springfield, they come back to their home communities, and they say, I'm down there fighting for the truly vulnerable. When social service providers call, you're right, you should be paid, and I'm down there fighting for it. And yet, after all the money that we've taxed and spent and borrowed and spent, Illinois a few years ago was 51st out of 50, one of my favorite statistics, although because it just speaks to how uncivilized, how barbaric we've become. 51st out of 50, behind even the District of Columbia, according to HHS, in providing services to the developmentally disabled. In the intervening half a dozen years, we've shot up to 47th out of 50. So not a lot of progress. So if everybody's so interested in making sure the truly vulnerable are taken care of, as we all would want them taken care of, given state services they need through no fault of their own, how is it we're 51st or 47th out of 50?
Yeah, and that begs the question. I think that's why I think what Rauner's trying to do is so important, is to revitalize the state, have growth, have companies moving back in, keeping people here, taxpayers, instead of them having them go to Texas and Indiana and Wisconsin. Keep them in Illinois and have their tax dollars help fund the needs that we have in the state. But what we're doing right now is chasing them away, and that's making the problem even worse.
And then there was this other interesting note this week, a study that was released, a survey of business leaders that was released by the the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, their Institute for Legal Reform, about the business-friendly legal climate or litigation climate in Illinois finds itself again 47th out of 50 in terms of favorable legal climate, because you have these jackpot justice counties like Cook and Madison, St. Clair, the Metro East, where it's set up for the plaintiff's attorneys, not for a system that is responsible and equitable to people who've legitimately been injured, but it's not this game of essentially jackpot justice, rush to the courthouse.
Yeah, and we see that across the board in Illinois. And workers' compensation costs, again, not another sexy topic, but all these topics are just straining the economy and not allowing it to grow, hurting tax revenues, which then hurts our ability to fund the programs for the needy.
So much needs to be turned around, to borrow a Ronnerism.